Why should you read The Solar Cycle by Gene Wolfe? 12 books. I have previously talked about why you should read The Book of the New Sun. I have reviewed all these books as well on this channel. I haven't reviewed the short stories. There are a couple of short stories that don't matter for the purpose of our discussion today. Why should you read it? Beyond what I've said about The Book of the New Sun being good. Well, basically you should read it because it is, if you feel you've got the headspace for it, it's one of the best series ever written. It's one of the most important sci-fi-ish, kind of fantasy at points series ever written. It's one of the greatest literary accomplishments of any author ever. It is comparable to Middle-earth or The Culture or the Dune series. It's on that kind of tier. We're not talking about Gene Wolfe is one of those minor authors who some people enjoy. He may well be a niche author, but what he accomplishes is categorically top tier. Now, the absolute upfront thing to admit is that Gene Wolfe is tough. He's not a simple author. He intentionally, a big thing he says is he thinks his audience, or he did say his audience could work stuff out. He trusted them to pay attention and work stuff out, and so he didn't belabor points. You won't find a clue dropped 8 times to make sure you get it. He also messes around a lot with narrators, and whether narrators are not necessarily unreliable in the sense of lying to you. An unreliable narrator who actively lies to you is probably not very rarely, let's say, a good narrator. But more, Wolfe across his books messes around with the fact that the narrator may not tell you the whole truth, or may tell you something that's completely true but which points you in a direction which is misleading, or may tell you everything that you need to know about lots of stuff, but which in the end means you miss something about them they don't want to talk about. These are living authors. There's a meme recently, not meme, sorry, a trend of like 10 novels but with no repeat authors. And I saw a good one which was 10 Gene Wolfe books but by 10 different narrators because they're so different. And The Solar Cycle, you run the gamut there. This is Wolfe at the height of his powers throughout. This is him telling the only truly super extended story he tells. The next longest series he has is 3 books, I think. In terms of Latro is the next longest. And there's 12 here. And it also spans his career. It spans from the relatively early period where he has begun to make a name for himself and then writes what's often seen as his magnum opus, The Book of the New Sun, through to writes in the early 80s, through to the early noughties, so 20 years later, when his style and his career has gone through many revolutions, and he's writing The Book of the Short Sun, and he is, he's no longer getting the nominations he once did. There's an interesting thing about the eclipse of his star, and because he had a long writing career, this is something you pick up through his career, not he died or retired, and then 20 years later, people didn't pay as much attention. You see, in his career, there's an increasing neglect. And then finally, you start to see him being picked up just a bit more in the back end of his career, the final stretch. This is a guy called Ursula Le Guin. He is our Melville. You see, George R. R. Martin said The Book of the New Sun is one of the great science fantasy epics of all time. Neil Gaiman will say that he learnt a lot about, narration from Wolfe. That may or may not be praise. You see, I think is it Washington Post Book World or something like that, saying he is, the most important, functionally the most important science fiction or genre writer ever in a literary sense. So, what is The Solar Cycle about? It's hard when you're talking about 12 books. This is including omnibuses. 12 books plus some short stories. How do you describe all that, especially when you're not talking about one single obvious plot? What I mean by that is Wheel of Time is the plot of The Dragon Reborn and The Darkness. There's lots of things in there that you wouldn't want to spoil by describing the whole thing, but there are 14 books or whatever it is that are about that. The Stormlight Archive, you could kind of come up with a summary on the same basis. Here, you have 3 main narrators, and you have You have many different locations. You have multiversal things going on that are quite confusing. You have timey-wimey thing going on, it seems, that are quite confusing. And there are, formally speaking, two completely separate sub-series, but which nonetheless come to the same conclusion. Is, in that sense, structurally quite complicated. It also has a complicated writing history, which in terms of why it was written and when and at what point, which does affect that. Ultimately, what we're talking about is, let's say this way: there are two places to start. The two places to start are the Book of the New Sun and the Book of the Long Sun. And the Book of the New Sun is about, in a dying Earth with a red sun, Severian, the torturer's apprentice, begins to enter into the mysteries of his world and ends up travelling the world with the great executioner's blade, Terminus Est, meeting many people again and again. And, a big thing is Severian is an infamous narrator for being seemingly insane, for saying he has a perfect memory, but seemingly forgetting things in the same page. He is part of a monstrous system, but a monstrous system which is also profoundly human and humanized and sympathizable, even in a world that's decrepit and defunct. And we follow his journey as he seeks the new sun, or seeks to discover more about the new sun that could bring life or death to his dying Earth. And the Book of the Long Sun, which is in these two bind-ups nowadays, Epiphany of the Long Sun and Litany first and then Epiphany. And this is about a priest on what is some sort of generationship, like a Dyson sphere or something. He's called Silk, and he is. It starts off with him having, he's a priest of a polytheistic cult on this generation ship, and he has in the very first subchapter some sort of revelation of an outsider god who points him in a new direction, and which, in the context of a decaying environment where things are getting hotter, where the sun is getting hotter and hotter, and the technology people had from hundreds of years ago, when the long sun world started, because they are kind of aware they've been sent by the gods into space or something, but they don't really know what space is. It's all very, their knowledge and their technology is collapsing. So there's a parallel in terms of decay and a saviour figure, and there's also very different situations. But it's also, that Book of the New Sun is about this quite dark and complex and unpleasant figure in some ways. Many people don't like Severian as a narrator. It is the story, Gene Wolfe would say, of, not that Severian is a Christ figure, but that he's a Christian. Like in Pilgrim's Progress, he's trying to journey towards greater integrity, completion, virtue. Silk, in many ways, is much more sympathetic, narrates in a very different style, partly because Wolfe's style had changed in terms of his general writing style, but also both the direct style itself and the structure has changed. There is more action and so on in Book of the New Sun. Book of the Long Sun takes a much more intentionally stagey, play-like presentation, and this is actually something mentioned at one point, is how much the stuff might sound like a stage, like a stage play. And here you have this figure who is not a sword-wielding sort of warrior, perhaps, or certainly a man trained for torture and killing. Wandering a cold and strange earth in this very baroque metal way, but instead you have a town priest in something that's almost Spanish locale, but not totally, but almost Spanish locale, and he begins to destabilize a kind of corrupt and decayed situation. Simply by speaking, not by action, generally speaking. It's complicated. And I think you get this amazing world building in each. The new sun is full of stuff which is called by strange names familiar to us, but which is utterly strange to us. You know, a Destria is actually not a warhorse, but I think a six-legged alien beast. There are aliens all over the place, it seems, and it's not quite clear what they are. And Severian, Severian is constantly confused about what's happening. Then you get Silk, where things are perhaps more familiar, and you get more. It's not clockpunk, but there's just this sense of this kind of clockpunky, steampunky element of odd technology and of urban dystopia, and also of of a very different kind of character, as I've said. So you have these quite different settings with very different kind of worlds being described, but it becomes clear, and this is no secret, it's not a spoiler, I think, to say the books in the Solar Cycle are connected. It becomes clear there is a connection or a set of connections. You can start with either. It starts with Nightside the Long Sun in Litany of the Long Sun, or with Shadow of the Torturer in Book of the New Sun. New Sun is available in Sci-Fi Masterworks, so it's fairly easily gettable. Long Sun, are both of mine. I'm trying. Some of these are only print on demand nowadays. I think these ones, which are Orb, these are actually properly printed, but I don't know how available they'll be when you look at them. There are some other books in this series. There is Earth of the New Sun, which connects to Book of the New Sun and is part of that story. And Earth of the New Sun was written because Gene Wolfe's editors wanted something to kind of round out certain things in Book of the New Sun. And this being Gene Wolfe, he eventually agreed, but rather than it being a straight kind of like, oh, by the way, here's all the stuff you needed to know, or this is the extra stuff, or whatever. Instead, it becomes a set of experiments and slightly weird, different things he wants to do, which has, in some way, I think, whereas New Sun is very popular, some of us do really like The Long Sun just as much. I think Nightside the Long Sun is about as approachable a book in some ways as Wolfe writes in that vein, of his longer form books. Earth the New Sun gets more mixed reviews. I think it's actually pretty good. You can watch my review or have a capsule review at the start if you've not read any of it, any Solar Cycle books. But it starts to. It's obviously him wanting to experiment with things to do with form and location and style of story, and then ultimately not just tell the kind of the bits of the story you didn't know or you're confused about or whatever else and answer people's questions, but to tell an ultimately not different, but also different. How do I even say this? Especially because I'm not trying to spoil you. Not a different story, but a story, but not simply giving you plot details, but attempting to accomplish something quite profound and artistic in that. There is then a series which relies really on having read, I would say, all of these, and that means it's gated behind 9 books. And that's the tough thing about Book of the Short Sun. These are available, I think, now pretty much only as print on demand, unless you're buying secondhand. As in they're not in standard print. They're on print on demand on Amazon, I guess. They are, which are called On Blue's Waters and Green's Jungles and Return to the Wall, which are a sequel, a direct sequel to Book of the Long Sun. So you have to read Book of the Long Sun, but also you're going to want to read Book of the New Sun and Earth of the New Sun, really. And I think that's part of the fun. It's a bit like, it's not controversial, and it wouldn't be in the case of Wheel of Time to say you need to read the first 9 books before you read the last 5 or whatever the issues about the slog. You'd say, oh yeah, everything, even if you skip some stuff because it's actually bad, you need to get through that stuff. The same with The Dark Tower. Song of Susanna, book 6 is not amazing, but I've literally never read anyone be like, just skip it and go to the last paragraph of book 7. And Book of the Book of the New Sun, Book of the Long Sun, both amazing books in themselves. You can read them at whichever order you want. Publication, I guess, is possibly very slightly to be preferred, but I think equally Nightside is probably even more approachable than Shadow of the Torturer. Wolfe is always tough. If you are trying to solve everything the first read through, You shouldn't do that. You should read it, be confused, maybe look it up afterwards on the internet a bit, reread it. So, I wouldn't worry about that, but I understand, if you're looking for the slightly more approachable one, Nightside, probably slightly more approachable. More sympathetic hero, easier voice, I think, and a setting which is slightly less alien and alienating. Book of the Short Sun is, in my view, and in other people's view as well, not everyone's, but in many people's view, the highlight of the solar cycle. It is an apotheosis. An apotheosis is a big theme in the solar cycle, it should be said, but it is the apotheosis of the series. It's a point where, step by step, from the first pages here through increasingly strange and confusing things all the way to the end, it is all the motifs that have been introduced, both the kind of large-scale motif of the series to do with death and rebirth and so on, and also character motifs, character themes, like your Peter and the Wolf. Animals are brought back in, and some questions are answered and resolved. That's not really what Wolfe wants to do. He's not simply saying, oh, now it's the farewell tour where we finally tell everyone what happened. He wants to tell a different kind of story, but the story is one which subsumes the rest of the solar cycle and which answers questions at that high level. It's profoundly moving. It has some incredibly... and there are emotive passages throughout the solar cycle. It's a clever and emotionally intelligent set of books. But Book of the Short Sun has payoffs, which are not payoffs simply because, here's a great payoff, by the way. Theoden finally takes agency for himself and leads the Rohirrim to Minas Tirith in the Pelennor Fields, and there dies fighting. There is a full arc there. There's that sort of thing, but I don't even really mean that. What I mean by payoff is there is an emotional theme or a spiritual theme or an intellectual theme that has been drawn out over 12 books. By the time you're reading Return to the World, 12 books, crossing multiple characters, and finally kind of is brought in, it finally comes up again at the end of the symphony to be resolved, to be merged with other elements and then resolved. And it's magnificent stuff. You see a lot of new environments, new places, lots of... it's also a book, much like all these books are, and this is something which is a major theme for Wolfe, and I think is perhaps part of what makes him less attractive to people who read him and do get him and are willing to put the effort in, nowadays at least. But I think there's an interesting thing you see even in Wolfe circles, a lot of disagreement. Are Wolfe's characters really heroic or positive, or are they all basically evil sociopaths who are masking their evil sociopathy with their narrative ability? And there are as many interpretations as there are Wolfe readers, and so you must become a Wolfe reader and read it and disagree with me. But I think here's the thing, is that ultimately these stories are all about flawed people, broken people who, both from their own conscience, through the journey of their individual faiths, through their family, through their loved ones, whoever it is, there is a journey for each of them towards being a more complete person, a more integrated person. And I think that is a powerful story, and it's not one often told in that way in fiction. I don't mean there aren't power fantasies or things where people have a problem at the start and resolve it by the end. The problem here is us. The problem here is me and you, and these are books about, in that sense, you and I going on the Pilgrim's Progress in strange, fantastical lands, and coming face to face with evil and seeking after the confusing, mysterious good. And I think by the end of Return to the Wall, you have the great 20th century articulation of that theme. I think 21st century even by the end of Return to the Wall, but largely 20th century. I think I can't recommend the Solar Cycle to you if you're looking for good pulp, or though there are pulp themes and pulp images, I can't recommend it to you if you're looking for something that is actually grimdark, but I can say there are grim things in it. I can't say it's an easy read. Though it has fantastic style, it's beautiful at points. Gene Wolfe is a very good writer. There's no problem there, you know, that's not what you'll find. These are nonetheless complicated, knotty books. There are still mysteries in the books that are not fully resolved, you know, that people argue about a lot, or that are simply baffling. There are, you know, these are books by a really quite singular person. Gene Wolfe is an unusual person, you know, was a striking, unusual, in some ways eccentric person. But are they nonetheless books that are central to the achievements of genre fiction in our age? Yes. Are they powerful books? Are they beautiful books? Yes. You know, are they necessary books for someone who is willing to dive in and to drown themselves in something, as Severian drowns in the Guile? Yes, they are necessary books for someone who wants to really sample the heights and depths of genre fiction. So that's why I think you should read The Solar Cycle. There's lots more caveats on this in a funny way than on some of the other why you should reads I've done. But that's simply because there's no point in telling people that this is going to be something it's not. This is itself a Pilgrim's Progress to read. But yes, if you've read them, and if you've got other reasons to recommend them, I would love, or that you hated them perhaps, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Till next time.